On March 7th, the 5th Tales from the Pizzaplex book, The Bobby Dots Conclusion, released, and I did 4 videos on that book, one for each of the stories in the book, including the epilogue. Those videos were summaries on the brand new stories. However, it's also fun to go back to the old stories, ones we've already seen before, and the Fazbear Frights graphic novels offer just that and more. It's really interesting to see how these stories are applied into graphic art, and it just so happens that the second of the Fazbear Frights graphic novels came out the same day as the Bobby Dots Conclusion. However, one downside to the graphic novels is that since the artists are given free will, the art sometimes ends up being inconsistent with the original stories. Yesterday I released a YouTube short where I went over the canonicity of these books, so go watch that if you haven't already. But basically the conclusion was that the art mostly isn't reliable information, but the dialogue in them is. So in this video I'm going to read through the entirety of the second Fazbear Frights graphic novel, and discuss the inconsistencies with the art, interesting details within the dialogue, and perhaps more, so without further ado, let's get started. Number 1. The stories in this book are Fetch, Room for One More, and The New Kid. The cover of the book is Room for One More, showing off the mini arenas. However, what's interesting about this is that we can see tiny endoskeleton mouths inside of their mouths. Normally, I wouldn't think anything of this, but the cover originally omitted this detail. This was deliberately changed, which is interesting as it seems to imply that it is an actual canon detail. So it seems like the mini arenas are a bit more than just small wooden dolls. They're actually metal animatronics. I mean, they could have wooden shells, but they have metal endoskeletons, which I just find a little weird. Number 2. Pretty much one of the main details in the original Fetch story was how, at the beginning, Greg noticed a black stain on the ceiling when he found Fetch, a stain that was the only stain in the entire restaurant. It stuck out. This stain is agony, which entered Fetch when he was interacted with, and is what caused him to do the stuff that he does. However, this stain is actually nowhere to be seen in the graphic novel. You'd think a decently important and also pretty simple lore detail wouldn't be cut, but it was. Number 13. This is a detail that was in the original Fetch story, but I never noticed it, and it could mean nothing, but it could be an intentional detail. When Greg gets home to find his Uncle Darren, they discuss the weather a bit, and Uncle Darren mentions how the storms came early this year, and brings up a storm that there was last week for Halloween. But when we look over at Out of Stock, the third story in the second Fazbear Frights book, the same book with Fetch in it, that story takes place on Halloween and during a big storm. This is a very interesting detail if it is to be intentional. The problem though is I don't know if the timing works. Fetch is used to create the Stitch Wraith, and the Stitch Wraith in Epilogue 2 is seen picking up the pieces of the plush trap chaser off the tracks. Is it possible that the second Fazbear Frights epilogue is like a month or longer after Out of Stock and the plush trap chaser parts were just there for a while? Maybe, but it would be a little strange, so I don't know if this detail means anything, but I felt it was worth mentioning. Number 4. On page 40, when Gregory, Hades, and Syrup return to the abandoned Freddy's building, there's a panel where we can see what looks like a Spring Bonnie poster on the wall. This was not in the original book, and it's also not even accurate to the lore, so why is this here? I think this is likely an error on the artist's part, and I just find it a bit weird that this would be here, so yeah. Number 5. When Greg realizes Fetch is after Kimberly, in the original Fetch book, he waits behind a bush next to her house for them to come home. Not the most logical solution, but it's better than what he does in the graphic novel. Instead, in the graphic novel, Greg literally breaks into their house. It doesn't show how, and it's way more logical, and what's weird is that this was pointed out in the dialogue, meaning Greg was supposed to break in, despite that not being the case in the original. It wasn't the artist that chose for this to happen in the graphic novel, it was Scott, which I just find really weird. Number 6. Right at the end of the original Fetch, Greg gets home and takes a hot shower before heading into his bedroom and finding Kimberly's body on the floor. However, in the graphic novel, he goes straight to his room after getting yelled at by his dad and finds Kimberly right then and there. He also straight up screams in that moment, while in the original, it's said that he barely contained a scream. So we finished up all the details in Fetch, let's move on to Room for One More. Number 7. There's a point in the story where Stanley has a nightmare about being late for work and gets in a cab to get there as fast as possible. However, he doesn't recognize any of the landmarks around him. The driver of the cab doesn't seem to know where he's going either. The driver ends up being Funtime Foxy, who lunges at him. The issue with this nightmare in the graphic novel, however, is that we can tell from the sky in the background that the nightmare happens during the day, but Stanley's job starts at 11 p.m. Sure, it's a nightmare, but Stanley is aware enough that he questions the street names and the absences of buildings that should be around but aren't, meaning he definitely would have realized if he was going to work during the day instead of at night. Number 8. Room for One More was a really good graphic story as it translated the original story very well, and there were very few inconsistencies. The only one I found was the one I just mentioned, but there's one other thing in the story that was actually really cool. One thing I really like about Anthony Morris Jr.'s stories are the little details that he includes. In the Darkrooms interview, he revealed that the license plate in the junkyard in To Be Beautiful is actually his wife's birthday. The same license plate ends up appearing later on in the story as well. In this story, there's another small detail. It's obviously a very different one, but it's similar in the way that it's a small detail that he keeps too. At the beginning of the story, Stanley is a bit overweight, but not terribly overweight. This is as a result of his breakup with Amber. He gained a bit of weight. But at the end of the story, we can see that Stanley is a bit more chunky, which makes sense because of the mini arenas that are inside his body and expanding his body a bit. You can notice his body expanding throughout the story, and I like that the artist pays attention to that kind of stuff. Number 9. Let's move on to The New Kid. The New Kid is one of my favorite Fazbear Frights stories, so I really want the graphic novel presentation of it to be good. And I think it was. I think it makes Devin quite a psychopath, just like he is in the original book. However, the first example of this is a bit inaccurate. Devin tells a fricked up story to the class to get the attention of his crush Heather, as the names used in the story were the names of Heather's sisters. And in the story he tells they are brutally killed, and Heather tells him that the story was sick. In the original story, he misinterprets this as her saying it was sick as in awesome. But in the graphic novel, he interprets it correctly, but just thinks that, yeah, it was pretty screwed up, but it still got her attention. Number 10. In the original New Kid story, the entrance to Freddy Fazbear's Pizza is a large Freddy Fazbear head, and the door was through his mouth. I remember this because I actually built the FNAF 1 location in Minecraft a few times, and I've included this Freddy mouth entrance for fun. However, in the graphic novel, the entrance looks nothing like this. Instead, there is simply a sign with Freddy, Bonnie, and Chica, and for some reason they're peeking over the sign. Freddy and Golden Freddy also strangely have a red line on their hats, which the original Freddy and Golden Freddy do not have. That's actually a feature of Toy Freddy. Number 11. Strangely enough, Bonnie in this graphic novel has 3 buttons on his chest. Bonnie in the games before has only ever had either no buttons or 2 buttons. The only character in the series to have 3 buttons is the puppet. It's obviously not a big deal or anything, it's just a small error or inconsistency, but that's kind of the point of this video. Number 12. When Kelsey's arm is inside Golden Freddy, he feels something move inside the suit. He doesn't just feel something in general, he feels something specifically move. Inside the suit is the body of Andrew, who is dead, so what inside the suit would be moving? Well, earlier in the story there is the slithering sound in the walls of Freddy's, which seems to be Eleanor, so it could be a tentacle or something in there, but who knows, I don't know, it could be something else. We're also shown Devin getting straight up attacked by Golden Freddy at the end, despite the original book having the ending be left open-ended. Since a scream is actually written into the story, this was supposed to happen, so this graphic novel basically tells us that Devin does die at the end of the story. Not really a surprise, but I don't know if I like knowing for sure, as the mystery of the New Kid is one of the things that makes it so good to me. But that's everything I noticed in the second Fazbear Frights graphic novel. The next one is coming out in quite a while in September, and when it actually does, I will be doing another video just like this one. That one has Bunny Call on the cover, which I'm really excited to see, so that'll be fun to read when it does come out. But anyways guys, I hope you all enjoyed this video. If you did, then make sure to leave a like and subscribe if you want to, but I'll see you all in the next video. Bye guys!